Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Friday, November 28th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 74.2 degrees, with a low dipping to 47.8 degrees, so layer up for the evening chill. Happy Black Friday, shoppers! Time to hunt those deals. Coming up, we'll break down Trump's pledge to permanently halt migration from developing nations, explore why retailers are betting on big Black Friday spending splurges, even as consumers stay cautious, plus other key stories from around the world. All this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. A violent attack in Washington, D.C., and a new barrage of sweeping immigration promises from President Trump. Reporter Ethan is with us. Ethan, start with what happened and what the president's now proposing.
The sequence began on Thanksgiving Day yesterday, November 27, 2025. Hours after a targeted shooting killed 20-year-old West Virginia National Guard Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and critically wounded 24-year-old Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, President Trump posted a series of messages on Truth Social from West Palm Beach. According to NPR reporting via the Associated Press and NBC News, he vowed to, quote, permanently pause migration from all third world countries, end quote, and promised what he called reverse migration to fix what he described as an immigration crisis.
Who's the suspect, and how does his background tie into the politics here?
Authorities have identified the suspect as 29-year-old Rahmanullah Lakanwal, an Afghan national who worked with CIA-backed forces during the Afghanistan War. NPR and KLTV.com, both citing the AP, report he entered the U.S. in September 2021 through Operation Allies Welcome, the Biden-era program to resettle Afghan allies. The New York Times reporting, echoed by several outlets, notes he had no criminal record but may have struggled with war-related trauma and paranoia about deportation. The president himself wrote that Lakanwal, quote, went cuckoo, end quote.
What do we know about the attack and how he got to D.C.?
Investigators say Lakanwal drove roughly 700 miles from Bellingham, Washington to the Capitol, armed with a .357 Smith & Wesson revolver. He was shot, wounded non-fatally, and taken into custody. NBC News reports prosecutors describe the shooting as targeted, though the motive hasn't been fully detailed publicly. There's no indication of prior arrests, which complicates the narrative of vetting failures.
The president tied this to immigration policy. What exactly did he promise?
In those posts, pieced together by NPR, NBC News, and local outlets carrying AP copy, he argued that migration from, in his words, failed nations had weakened the country. He said, quote, I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, end quote. He also pledged, quote, only reverse migration can fully cure this situation, end quote, describing mass removals, denaturalization of people who, he claimed, undermine domestic tranquility, and cutting off federal benefits to non-citizens.
He also singled out certain communities, didn't he?
He did. The Washington Post and NBC News note he accused, without evidence, hundreds of thousands of Somali immigrants of, quote, completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota, end quote, and used a slur for Governor Tim Walz, while suggesting Representative Ilhan Omar probably came illegally. He threatened to end temporary protected status for Somali nationals, even though a congressional report from August 2025 puts that TPS population at around 700 people nationwide. The posts ended with, quote, happy Thanksgiving to all, except those that hate, steal, murder, and destroy everything that America stands for. You won't be here for long, end quote.
Did the administration take any immediate steps after those posts?
Yes, and that's notable. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director Joseph Edlow announced an indefinite pause on immigration requests from Afghan nationals, and said USCIS would re-examine every green card issued to people from so-called countries of concern. According to DHS and USCIS statements summarized by the American Immigration Council, that list includes 19 nations such as Afghanistan, Iran, Somalia, and Venezuela. DHS also began reviewing asylum approvals from the Biden years, building on travel restrictions the administration imposed back in June 2025.
How much legal room does a president have to do something like a permanent pause?
The starting point is Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which lets a president suspend entry of, quote, any class of aliens, end quote, if their entry is deemed detrimental. The Supreme Court in Trump v. Hawaii in 2018 upheld a version of this power for the so-called travel ban, deferring to asserted national security judgments. But legal experts told NPR and the American Immigration Council that the authority isn't limitless. It can't erase statutory rights like asylum or obligations under the Convention Against Torture.
So asylum and other protections would still apply?
Exactly. Federal courts, in cases like East Bay Sanctuary Covenant versus Trump, rejected attempts to effectively nullify asylum based on how someone entered or their nationality, because Congress wrote those protections into the INA. Withholding of removal and the anti-torture rules under CAT also can't be sidestepped by a proclamation. Even if entry is paused, people at risk of persecution or torture retain the right to seek protection, and immigration judges would still have to adjudicate those claims.
What about the idea of reverse migration and mass denaturalization?
That's where the legal terrain gets even rockier for the administration. Denaturalization is possible only with, as the Supreme Court put it in Maslin-Jack v. United States, clear, unequivocal proof of fraud or material misrepresentation. You can't strip citizenship for disfavored speech or political views. Landmark cases like Afroyim v. Rusk and Trop v. Dulles treat citizenship as a fundamental status not subject to easy revocation. And for green card holders, due process applies. Removal requires specific statutory grounds, and in Zedvitas v. Davis, the court limited how long someone can be detained after an order.
He also threatened to end benefits for non-citizens. Is that already mostly in place?
Much of it is. The 1996 welfare law, known as PRWORA, already restricts federal benefits for many non-citizens, with exceptions Congress carved out for refugees, asylees, and certain humanitarian categories. Ending those exceptions would almost certainly require legislation, not just an executive move. The Washington Post points out that when past administrations tried to reinterpret public charge rules, courts scrutinized them closely for conflicts with the statute and arbitrary decision-making.
He claimed immigrants drive crime and drain resources. Do the numbers back that up?
The data cuts the other way. An Economist study highlighted by NPR and KLTV.com found immigrants are about 60% less likely to be incarcerated than people born in the U.S., a pattern researchers have observed for more than a century. The Annual Review of Criminology reported in 2024 that neighborhoods with higher concentrations of immigrants are not associated with increased crime, and that most U.S. offenses are committed by citizens. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics says foreign-born workers hold nearly 31 million jobs, underscoring their economic role.
How are international organizations and advocacy groups reacting?
The UN refugee and human rights agencies urged due process and warned against collective punishment, as NBC News reported. Civil rights groups like CAR called the rhetoric unconstitutional and dangerous to Muslim and African communities. The ACLU and the National Immigration Law Center, in statements summarized across outlets, said they're preparing to challenge any sweeping policy citing animus or lack of statutory authority. They also warned about the chilling effect on families already lawfully present.
Are there historical parallels being discussed?
Very much so. Historians interviewed by Just Security and the American Historical Association drew lines to the Chinese exclusion era, the Palmer raids, the Mexican repatriation of the 1930s, and Operation Wetback in 1954. Those episodes show how large-scale expulsions can be carried out in the short term, but often become national regrets. especially when citizens and legal residents get swept up. Those precedents also inform courts' sensitivity to equal protection concerns and discriminatory intent.
What about the specifics of yesterday's shooting suspect and the vetting that brought him here?
That's a central tension. Operation Allies Welcome involved multiple layers of screening through DHS, the State Department, and intelligence agencies, because many evacuees had worked with U.S. forces. NBC News and the AP say Lachenwall arrived in 2021, applied for asylum in December 2024, and got approval in April 2025 under this administration. The Times, reporting, echoed in aggregates, emphasizes possible mental health issues linked to war trauma, something experts say vetting isn't designed to predict or disqualify absent signs of danger.
Did the White House itself endorse the president's posts?
The Rapid Response account did more than endorse them. According to NPR and NBC News, it called the Thanksgiving message, quote, one of the most important messages ever released by President Trump, end quote. That framing turns a single case into a catalyst for broader policy, even though, as you noted, we've not yet seen a formal proclamation. As of today, November 28th, there's no published executive order or proclamation setting a legally operative permanent pause.
You mentioned earlier that DHS is reviewing asylum approvals. Could those be rolled back?
The agency can revisit cases if there's credible evidence of fraud or changed circumstances that undermine eligibility, but wholesale revocation en masse would collide with the INA's case-by-case framework and due process requirements. Courts have previously pushed back on categorical actions that bypass individualized findings, and advocates told NPR they'd expect rapid injunctions if something like that were attempted. Even in security contexts, agencies must show their work.
What are we hearing from Minnesota since he singled them out?
Local leaders and community groups condemned the language, with Minneapolis-based advocates telling the Star Tribune and NPR that it stigmatizes Somali Americans who are citizens and taxpayers. Representative Omar's office reiterated that she lawfully resettled as a child refugee, countering claims she came illegally. The rhetoric also unsettles businesses and schools in the Twin Cities that rely on immigrant workers and families. They remember the confusion around earlier travel bans and TPS terminations.
How does this fit into Trump's earlier actions this year?
It's a continuation and an escalation. In June 2025, the administration broadened travel restrictions from a dozen countries and limited visas from 7 more on national security grounds, as NBC News recapped. Fees have increased, refugee admissions were tightened, and parole programs have been narrowed. Yesterday's posts take those levers and imagine using them on a much wider scale, in effect attempting to redraw who gets to come and who gets to stay.
Could a nationality-based pause face discrimination claims?
It likely will. Trump versus Hawaii gives presidents a lot of deference if they present a facially neutral policy backed by security rationales. But courts can still probe for pretext and animus. If the record shows religion or race targeting, equal protection claims under the Fifth Amendment get traction, and agencies must also navigate the INA's anti-discrimination provisions. Statements like accusing immigrants from, quote, decadent, backward, and crime-ridden nations, end quote, could become evidence of intent.
What about practical fallout if they try mass removals?
Law enforcement capacity is finite. During past surges, like the 2018-2019 workplace raids, NPR documented how operations disrupted schools, construction sites, and farms, often detaining people with deep community ties. The courts get backlogged, detention beds fill, and many cases end in relief or supervised release, not deportation. Economists warn that pulling tens of thousands of workers out of sectors like elder care and food processing would ripple through prices and services.
What's the status of the wounded guardsmen, and how's the military responding?
Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf remains in critical condition, according to AP updates carried by KLTV.com and NBC News as of last night. The West Virginia National Guard issued a statement honoring Specialist Beckstrom's service and asking for privacy for both families. The Pentagon hasn't linked the attack to any broader threat at this point, but it has coordinated support for the unit. The focus there remains on the victims and the investigation.
Any indication Congress might get involved legislatively?
You're already seeing lines drawn. Some Republican lawmakers praised the tougher stance and urged codifying broader 212 F-style authorities, while Democrats warned about collective punishment and due process violations. The Washington Post reports moderates in both parties are watching the courts, since judicial rulings will shape what's even possible. Absent new law, the administration has to work within the INA and past Supreme Court limits.
Bottom line, what should people watch for next?
The key is whether a formal proclamation appears in the next few days, changing the legal landscape from rhetoric to enforceable policy. Lawsuits would follow within hours, with arguments over 212 F, asylum, equal protection, and CAT obligations. Also watch how USCIS applies this green card review, because real families could face denials or delays even before courts weigh in. And we'll see whether the administration narrows its language to survive the inevitable court scrutiny.
Ethan, thanks for walking us through all of this.
Thank you, Grace.
It's Black Friday, November 28, 2025, and the holiday shopping rush is on. Shoppers sound cautious, but retailers are pushing hard. Chloe's with us. What's the mood out there?
Mixed, but leaning anxious. Cap Radio's morning edition summed it up. People feel apprehensive, while stores are urging splurges with stretched-out Black Friday deals. Surveys from PwC and McKinsey say net consumer sentiment is down about 35% from last year's peak, and 84% of people expect to cut spending over the next 6 months. Inflation, new tariffs, and a softer job market are all feeding that unease.
That's a big gap between desire and budget. Are we actually seeing spending fall?
Not as much as people say. Deloitte has been calling it a say-do gap. Folks talk about cutting back, then still spend when a deal feels right. Early on, PwC expected a 5% drop versus 2024, the sharpest in 5 years. But updated forecasts are sturdier. The National Retail Federation projects 3.7% to 4.2% growth. Deloitte sees about 2.9% to 3.4%, and MasterCard is around 3.6% year over year.
So growth's likely, but is it real demand or just higher prices?
A lot of it's price-driven. Visa analysts and coverage in The Guardian point out that unit volumes aren't surging. Higher sticker prices are doing the lifting. That's why shoppers are laser-focused on value and timing. They're prioritizing essentials and gifts that feel practical, not splurgy.
How early did people start this year?
Way before today. NRF says 2/3 started shopping ahead of Black Friday, with many delaying non-essentials to pounce on discounts. Deloitte notes that the Thanksgiving to Cyber Monday stretch still captures about 39% of holiday gift spending. And by the end of Cyber Monday, just 3 days from today, roughly 80% of budgets will be tapped.
And participation? Are deal hunters still showing up?
Absolutely. PwC finds that nearly 4 in 5 deal-aware shoppers plan to take part this weekend, and roughly 3/4 held off for the best price drops. Retail Dive reports gift cards top the list because they buy time in a volatile price environment. Online and mobile keep gaining share, with Athos Commerce seeing that browse online, pickup in-store routine become standard.
How have retailers adapted to all this caution?
They've turned Black Friday into a month-long drip of incentives. McKinsey points to Walmart's multi-week deals events as a template, staged rollouts, early access for loyalty members, and personalized offers inside apps. According to Retail Dive and Competera, we're seeing aggressive price matching and deeper targeted discounts for people who've abandoned carts or browsed certain items.
And the checkout experience. What's different there?
Omnichannel is the word. Avison Young and Athos Commerce highlight seamless handoffs between online and stores, more payment options including buy now, pay later, and mobile-first checkout that trims friction. Some brands are tying post-purchase engagement to QR codes on packaging, which North says helps nudge add-on buys and future visits.
With prices high, how are inventories holding up?
Tighter and smarter. Accio and Competera describe retailers leaning on real-time data and predictive AI to avoid overstocking the wrong things while staying ready to replenish the winners. That same data powers retargeting. If you looked at a jacket last week, you'll likely see it again today at a sharper price. Forbes has also flagged that user-generated content and prepaid subscriptions are being used to lock in loyalty before people drift.
You mentioned tariffs earlier. Any specifics shoppers might notice?
Toys are a clear example. Cap Radio referenced NPR interviews with Basic Fun CEO Jay Foreman, who warned earlier this year about tariff-driven Christmas risks. Prices have stabilized somewhat, he suggested, but at higher levels than before, so a sale might still be more than what you paid a couple of seasons back.
How much of this consumer anxiety is broader than shopping?
It's bigger than the mall. Forbes and Retail Dive cite University of Michigan readings showing confidence near lows, not seen since the early 1950s. Geopolitical tensions, persistent inflation, and news of a cooling labor market weigh on people's plans. That backdrop is why you see restraint in tone even as carts fill when the discount is right.
Let's talk tech. How is AI changing the hunt for deals this year?
It's mainstream now. McKinsey and PwC report that about 48% of global shoppers and roughly 51% in the U.S. plan to use AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini, more than double last year's level. Forbes and The Guardian say the top uses are price comparisons, tracking deals, summarizing reviews, building lists, and brainstorming gift ideas, especially among General Z.
Does that shift give retailers headaches?
It keeps them on their toes. Competera notes retailers are deploying their own AI dynamic pricing, personalized offers, and quick reoptimization when a competitor undercuts them. That arms race is part of why prices feel more elastic hour by hour. The goal is to meet value hunters at the exact moment they're ready to click.
For shoppers listening now, what's the smart play over this weekend?
Know your ceiling and pick your moment. According to Deloitte and NRF, the prime window is now through Cyber Monday, but the deepest markdowns are uneven. Some categories bottom out today, others on Sunday night or Monday morning. Using AI or price tracking tools to watch your shortlist rather than browsing endlessly tends to save both money and time.
Any categories where deals are notably strong?
Consumer electronics and small appliances are classic Black Friday anchors, and that's holding. Competera's monitoring suggests toys and apparel are competitive too, though toy margins are tighter because of those tariff pressures. Gift cards often come with bonus credits this weekend, which Retail Dive says is why they've risen to the top of planned purchases.
Are brick-and-mortar stores losing ground today?
They're still busy, but the growth edge is digital. Athos Commerce and MasterCard data show online outperforming foot traffic, with hybrid options like curbside pickup pulling people into stores primarily for pickup efficiency. The in-store experience is increasingly about easy returns, quick exchanges, and trying sizes, less about the traditional browse.
How does buy now, pay later factor into the season?
It's become a pressure valve. Avison Young and Deloitte note that BNPL gives budget-stretched shoppers a way to say yes without feeling the full hit today. That said, Visa's research suggests people are more cautious with installment plans than a year ago, aware that too many stacked payments can bite in January.
What about loyalty programs? Are they paying off?
They're central to the playbook. McKinsey highlights that early access and member-only flash drops are driving sign-ups and concentrating spend. Personalized deals, pushed through retailer apps, are timed to individual browsing patterns, which is why that perfect offer sometimes lands minutes after you've hesitated on a product page.
Are retailers confident they can keep momentum past Monday?
They're trying to front-load but keep some powder dry. Deloitte expects a downshift after Cyber Monday, then a second wind around the final shipping cutoff, and a last-minute in-store push the week before Christmas. NRF says the bigger challenge is margin discipline, avoiding a race to the bottom while still clearing seasonal inventory.
How much are returns shaping strategy?
A lot. Retail Dive has reported on retailers tightening return windows or offering store credit to curb abuse, while still advertising free, easy returns to reduce purchase hesitation. The best tactic they found is clarity. Spell out timelines, offer instant credits for exchanges, and route returns through stores to encourage an additional sale.
What are you watching as a signal of how strong this season will actually be?
Unit volumes and average order values together. MasterCard's headline growth number might look fine, but if volumes lag, it reinforces the inflation story. I'm also watching inventory turn and out-of-stock rates. Achio says tighter forecasting should prevent big stockouts, but if hot items vanish early, that can dampen December.
How does all this compare to last year's Black Friday?
The caution feels sharper, even if the spending totals come in similar. PwC's drop in sentiment and the University of Michigan's Dower readings suggest more psychological drag than in 2024. Yet, retailers have gotten faster with pricing and promotions, which may prop up sales despite the mood.
Any surprises in payment behavior so far today?
Early indications point to a heavier mobile mix and modest upticks in digital wallets. Visa's tracking suggests people are using more real-time account balance checks to avoid overspending, a small but telling change. And there's a slight tilt toward debit versus credit for everyday items, reserving credit lines for the bigger holiday buys.
We've talked a lot about prices. Are wages keeping pace enough to matter?
Not broadly. The Guardian's economic coverage and Visa's analyses tie the season's dynamic to the lingering gap between wage gains and cumulative inflation. Some households are fine, but a big middle is juggling trade-offs, gift cards instead of gadgets, or one big purchase instead of several small ones.
For retailers, what's the one risk that could trip them up?
Over-discounting. Deloitte warns that the temptation to chase volume can erode margins more than it lifts units. If shoppers sense that even deeper cuts are coming in mid-December, they'll wait, and that delays cash flow and squeezes profits.
And the one opportunity they could still seize?
Post-purchase engagement. North has shown that simple touches, QR-enabled tutorials, bonus content, or loyalty boosts after delivery can turn a single sale into a relationship. In a high-churn environment, that follow-through is the cheapest form of retention.
Bottom line this weekend?
Cap Radio's framing holds apprehension meets persuasion. Forecasts from NRF, Deloitte, and MasterCard point to modest top-line growth, much of it price-driven. The difference maker is smart timing on both sides.
Great insight, as always. Chloe, thanks for breaking it down on this Black Friday.
Thanks, Grace. Happy hunting and smart spending out there.
Here are some other headlines. A somber update from the nation's capital. Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, 20, has died after Wednesday's ambush near the White House that targeted 2 West Virginia National Guard members. Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, 24, remains in critical condition. Authorities have identified the suspect as Ramanullah Lakanwal, an Afghan national who arrived after the 2021 withdrawal. He's in custody and expected to face murder charges. The shooting adds fuel to a growing security firestorm around the Trump administration's move to have Guard troops take over policing in D.C. Officials now say they've launched a full-scale review of vetting procedures for Afghan arrivals, policy catching up to a tragedy that moved far too fast. In the legal lanes, a federal judge has thrown out Trump Justice Department cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, ruling the administration's hand-picked prosecutor was unlawfully appointed. The White House calls the dismissals unprecedented and vows to appeal. Critics describe the prosecutions as part of a broader retribution campaign led by Attorney General Pam Bondi and interim officials, an attempt to turn the scales of justice into a seesaw of politics. The ruling could set precedent on special prosecutor appointments as the Senate debates the controversial FBI director nomination of Kash Patel, whose enemies list has already drawn bipartisan side-eye. Expect a long, costly legal road that could run well into 2026. On the Money Beat, Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee told NPR that inflation's path is looking more gravel than paved, with the disinflationary process possibly hitting a wall. He's now more concerned about sticky prices than a softening job market, an audible pivot from earlier months. With the final 2025 Fed meeting set for December 9th and 10, Goolsbee wouldn't pre-commit on policy, warning potential new tariffs could fling dirt in the air, clouding the view of true price pressures. Translation: don't bank on front-loaded rate cuts. A pause may be the Fed's present to itself this December. The doves and hawks are still sharing a branch, just not the same songbook. A rare on-camera moment from Leonard Peltier, the 81-year-old Indigenous rights activist, now under home confinement on the Turtle Mountain Reservation after his life sentence was commuted in February, says he won't give up the fight. He maintains his innocence in the 1975 killings of 2 FBI agents, speaks of deteriorating health, and pledges to keep pressing for Indigenous sovereignty. The commutation, short of a full pardon, remains a lightning rod, hailed by supporters as overdue justice and decried by law enforcement groups remembering the fallen agents. After nearly 5 decades behind bars, Peltier's voice is freer, if his movement is not. And in the Middle East policy arena, Dawn's Sarah Leah Whitson argues the two-state solution has long masked a one-state apartheid reality. Her new book, co-authored with Michael Schaefer Omerman, proposes a roadmap to equal rights in a single democratic system. She also blasted the Trump team's warm welcome for Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, calling it the rehabilitation of a murderer to grease business deals. As Washington reorients toward Riyadh and away from rights-based red lines, progressives are rewriting their playbook, trading a partition plan for a principle: one person, one vote. In diplomacy, as in wordplay, the state of things matters, and so do the things of state. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.